Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the ROS Media channel. My name's Andy Benson, and I'm here again with my good friend Ian, who is our founder and president of the Republic of Old Souls. I'm in charge of the media platform here at ROS, and if you've not seen any of our videos of recent, we are doing a series called the Protocol Pep Talk. If you have been looking into the Republic of Old Souls, you'll know that Ian has constructed several protocols that are designed to stand alone on their own, but also they interlock and they interweave with one another to create a pathway to freedom, which I'm assuming is potentially why you are here, that you are sick and tired of the matrix, the system that we all seem to be living under, and that you're looking for ways to create more freedom in your life, for your family. And I think if that's the case, you're going to find the content that we have here really, really interesting. Today, what we're going to talk about is two of the protocols that we have, which is the Mortgage Liberation Protocol and also the Mortgage Redemption Protocol. They are different, but again, they interlock and they interweave with one another. So we're going to go into those. Before we dig into the actual protocols themselves, as in the solution to the mortgage bind that people find themselves in for 25 plus years, maybe a good place to start, Ian, would be the problem itself and what sort of led you to create these protocols for people.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what all the protocols are aiming to do, is to solve a particular problem. And most of the problems are very difficult to solve. They're not easy problems. And the mortgage problem is one of the biggest problems for people to solve. Many people have tried different methodologies, as have I tried different methodologies. And I'm just going to touch on a few of the methodologies that I have tried and what happened, because this might save a lot of people from making the same moves that I've made in the past and finding out that it's probably not going to work. Just before we get going, there is only one recorded case in legal precedent history where a mortgagor, that's a borrower, for those who don't know what the mortgagor means, the alleged borrower, which is the construct, the birth certificate construct, as a party to a contract with a mortgage provider, is a case called the Credit River case. You can find it if you've got the right search engine, because most of it's been removed. If you were to go on Yandex, for example, which is a Russian search engine, you will find that they haven't censored it on there, but they have on many other search engines, because they don't want you to find it, right? And in the Credit River case, the mortgagor, that's the body corporate birth certificate construct entity that sits on the Monopoly Board of Commerce as a debtor, by the way, argued that the mortgage provider, the so-called lender, hadn't actually lent any money of their own money. And it's a very interesting case. I mean, there are some YouTube channels where you can still find it, but you have to search, because they've largely removed it from the public record. And the guy won in a case in Minnesota. The mortgagor, that's the alleged borrower, who, by the way, is not the borrower, because the man is the creditor. The body corporate construct, the birth certificate construct, is the contracting party, the principal in the mortgage, who is a debtor, by the way. So on the Monopoly Board, everything on that board is a debtor, and it can never be a creditor. But the man who won, the living man who won, was able to advance a argument that the judge resonated with, and he brought in a forensic expert as well, that talked about how banking really works, but sort of stuff that I've been talking about on some other interviews. How do the banks really generate and create the currency which you find in your account? So you qualified for the mortgage, you'll find the balance in your account, or your lawyer will find it in their escrow account or their client account, or whatever it is. and it looks like the bank has transferred their money to the lawyer or to your account if you're not using a lawyer, which most people do. So he revealed, the guy in the Credit River case revealed how banking really works, and that there was no consideration in the loan. Now, that in the world of contract law is a very important aspect of contract law. If there's no consideration, there's no contract. So he was able to win the mortgagor. So the man who is the agent for the body corporate construct, the birth certificate construct, he went into the courtroom, argued that the bank didn't lend money, didn't lend their own money, there was no consideration, and therefore the mortgage was void. Now, that is the only case that I've ever found, and I've been looking for a long time, where there is some evidence of the guy winning, and you can't use that, by the way.
I think it's interesting how that case ended up in terms of the judge ruling in the client's favour. Perhaps you want to just wrap that up and tell the audience what actually happened.
Yeah, well, this kind of illustrates the problem that you're up against. You take on the mortgage market, which is trillions. It's $1 trillion market. You're not taking on a small, thing here when you take on the mortgage market. And you might think that you're taking on the mortgage provider that you've got a relationship with, but what you're actually doing is taking on the entire world mortgage market, because if you win, then everybody else who's got a mortgage is going to win as well, because they're all going to find it. And that's how it works in case precedent. Now, what happened to this guy in the Credit River case, who won his case? He disappeared, never to be seen again. And the judge also disappeared, never to be seen again. Now, whether they were given new identities and they're on a Caribbean island somewhere, who knows? Or whether they were erased from the scene, there's lots of speculation about that, and I don't know what happened to them. All I know is that you can't find either of them anywhere, and nobody ever uses those cases in any court environment. And if they do, they get struck out, and they say it's a vexatious argument, or it is a frivolous argument that the mortgagor, i.e. the guy who claims that he's been defrauded, because that's what people generally claim. I've been defrauded. Look at the Credit River case. That case demonstrates that the mortgage market and the mortgage providers don't lend money, so give me the same outcome as the guy in the Credit River case. But it doesn't ever happen. No. And I have first-hand experience of it. There are some other ways that people have tried, and I've tried this one, and this one should have worked. In the UK mortgage market, back in I think it was 2011, there's a lady called Carmel Butler, who is very prominent in investment banking, in the world of investment banking. And she used to work for, I don't know whether she still does, but she used to work for Deutsche Bank. Okay. And Deutsche Bank is one of the big players, as you know, the Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, Morgan Stanley, so on and so forth. And this is where the mortgages are actually held, the securities. So your mortgage is not what it appears. You've deposited a security with the bank that claims to be the mortgage provider, and then they sell that security to the investment banks, who then trade it. It's called hypothecation. And they make lots of money by trading and retrading the mortgage security, because what they're actually trading is the energy that you put into the mortgage contract. That's what they're trading. It's like modern slavery. They're trading your energy without you realizing it. Now, Carmel Butler, it's very interesting, and it's still there. If you look on Hansard, which is it's the parliamentary platform for all of the different speeches that people have made in Parliament, and they can't easily erase it, right? So in the Hansard records, you've got the speech that was given in 2011. Just picture the scene here. In 2008, there was an alleged credit crisis.
Yeah.
And some banks closed down, and some banks behaved very badly. I blew the whistle on the top 6 banks, so I know all about this. And basically the banks seized people's assets, and lots of people were repossessed or foreclosed on by mortgage providers in this alleged financial crisis, which is impossible for there to be a financial crisis, because they can print and create currency in any time they want. They don't need Big Brother to lend them some money or anything like that. No, they can just create as much currency as they want in their model. So the notion that there's a credit crisis is total and utter nonsense. But the effect of it, because it appeared to be real on the Monopoly Board of Commerce back in those days, was that lots of people lost their homes. We won't get into whether it was their home, because that's a subject I've already covered. But basically, people were repossessed or foreclosed on. And Carmel Butler read out in Parliament in 2011 that the mortgages were all fraud, right? Okay. And the reason why, because they've all been hypothecated, and the true owner of the mortgage security was not the mortgage provider, the entity that takes you in the courtroom if you're in foreclosure. No. The actual holder, what's known as the party of interest, is indeed the investment bank that's operating out of Wall Street, not the Santander branch down the high street that you thought you'd got your mortgage with, or the Barclays, or the Lloyds, or the whoever it is, or the Bank of America, or the Wells Fargo, depending on where you're listening to this interview, right? It's not that bank that is holding the mortgage security. It's the investment banks, and they're the real party of interest. So when you're experiencing a foreclosure, for example, it is the agent for the investment bank that is trying to get you out of the house. The real party of interest never turns up, because they send in their agent, which is the who appears to be the mortgage provider, who isn't the mortgage provider. So it's a bit of a shell game. It's like a spot the lady type game. You know, which cup is the real party of interest under? Is it under the obvious cup in those 3 cups that they move around, or is it under another one? It's a bit like that. It's like a magician's trick, you know, what's going on with mortgages. So Carmel Butler read out, which you'd think would be quite powerful, yeah? And I actually used this in the High Court in the UK, and regurgitated what she said into my cases that I took on for myself. Do you know what they did? They threw them all out. Apparently, they were nonsense, and they were vexatious, according to the High Court, right? So I can't write, according to the High Court. I write gibberish, according to the High Court. And the argument I put forward was vexatious, meaning it was malicious, meaning it had no substance, and it was there to harm people, right? And they called me a public nuisance, which is interesting, right? So you bring the truth into the High Court, and they reply with "you're vexatious" and "you're a public nuisance," right? So that's what happened in that case. Now there's another way, and then if you look at Professor Elizabeth Clark, she wrote a book called "The Registration Gap." Now this is another good one, right? So this is the chicken and egg argument, right? So if you are looking at your mortgage and you know that the bank that you're working with, the people that allegedly are going to lend you the money, don't have any money to lend, they need your signature on the contract before they create the currency. Then how can you borrow currency from the bank that hasn't yet created it? So in the contract, you have to sign the contract to get the money. And there is a gap between signing the contract and getting the money. And that is known as the registration gap. And Elizabeth Clark, Professor Elizabeth Clark, who used to sit on the upper tribunal above the land registry in the United Kingdom, wrote a book called The Registration Gap.
Okay.
Which pretty much means in simple language that you can't borrow money if it doesn't exist until you've signed the contract, right? And therefore the charge that they put on the house at the land registry isn't real because there was no consideration. There's a gap between the money, the signature, and the creation of the money. And it's known in the law as the registration gap. Now, it's not, this book that Elizabeth Clark wrote isn't a conspiracy book. She was on the panel that sat as the upper tribunal above the land registry in the United Kingdom. And she wrote the book to alert people to the fact that all mortgages were void because of the registration gap. Now, you would imagine that if somebody that prominent had written a book about it, that all you'd have to do is turn up and say, well, look at Elizabeth Clark's book. Look at that paragraph, look at that section there where she explains why every single mortgage is a void nullity, meaning it has no substance from the outset. And all you'd have to do is prove that.
Yeah.
Well, I tried that as well. We tried that at the land registry in 2019, 2020, by using the evidence from Professor Elizabeth Cook and her book. And that was thrown out by the land registry because they say, surprise, surprise. They said after 2 years, it was 2 years it went on for, they said ultimately, actually, we're not going to remove the mortgage charge from our register, not because we don't agree with your arguments, but because it's common practice to leave them there.
Okay.
So if it's common practice to leave mortgages there that you can clearly demonstrate are void from the outset, that just shows you what you're up against, yeah?
Yeah, a very corrupt system yet again.
But you see, what they hide behind is they say in the legal system, remember the legal system has got its own ways of doing things. That if things become common practice, and if things are for the common good, which they say mortgages are, the way that they put mortgages on the register is allegedly, according to them, for the common good.
Okay.
Then that becomes the law. You see? Common practice becomes legal, and they then justify it on that basis. And there's lots of examples of that in different walks of the legal system. So that's what you're up against. You can try and get things like private law settlement. You can try and issue affidavits to the mortgage provider and say the mortgage is void for all these reasons, and unless you prove to me otherwise, it's void. You can try that, and we tried that. You can try and get what's known as a foreign judgment. So you can take your agreement of the parties, your affidavit, unrebutted, and you can go overseas and try and get a judgment overseas and try and bring that back into the country that you're in as a foreign judgment. Well, we tried that as well, and that doesn't work either. So I do speak from quite some experience here, having tried various things. There is a way of making it work, but it's very, very technical, and that is to advance something called an adverse claim against the indentured trustee, which is the investment bank that holds the actual security, and then file a nominee corrective tax filing return to evidence that the investment bank isn't the actual holder of the security, which is what your mortgage has been financed under. And that is something that does work, but it's very technical, and it's not for this podcast or this interview. But there are papers on it on ecclesial law. If you're interested in it, I have published research papers on it, on how it works, and it does actually work if you know what you're doing, but we don't offer it as a process.
Okay.
So that's the problem. And we can now move into at some remedies.
Yeah, for sure. And the first one we want to talk about is the Mortgage Liberation Protocol. So the Mortgage Liberation Protocol, this is to do with live mortgages, mortgages that you currently have, that you're currently paying for, just to give you guys some context. And what we want to do is just go through, based on the webinars that we've done, based on the videos that myself and Ian have done, and just the content that Ian's put together. We've put together what we consider to be the top questions that people have been asking about this particular protocol. And the goal of today is just to kind of discuss that and just make some sense of that. So let's look at the top questions. The first one, Ian, is what exactly is it? So the Mortgage Liberation Protocol, if you were to just boil this down into very simple terms to begin with, and I know we'll dig into it in a bit more detail, but what is it?
Well, given the fact that we've established in the early part of this interview that if you're going to go to war with the mortgage industry, which you're not going to war with the mortgage provider that's on the contract that you're looking at, you're going to war with the entire mortgage industry worldwide. And that is that's many trillions of dollars are tied up in the mortgage market. So what you think is a localized issue, it's you versus the mortgage provider, it isn't. That's how big it is. So just to put it into context. So going to war with the mortgage market, unless you've got a very, very thick skin, unless you've got a skill set where you can apply what I mentioned earlier, the adverse claim and all the other things that go with that, you're probably going to lose that war. It's like in The Art of War, which I've also written a paper on. It's in the Ecclesial Law Technical Institute Library. If you're going to take on the opponent, you need to know what the opponent's weakness is, right? Well, if you're not exploiting their weakness and actually can win with exploiting their weakness, it's best not to go to war.
Yeah.
Right? Why would you go to war with the entire United States Army, Navy, and Air Force and all their space programs if you've got a pea shooter? Yeah. It's not a very smart thing to do, is it? No. And in the context of a mortgage, you're going to war with the biggest army, Navy, and Air Force in the world, and space program with lasers, and you've got a water pistol.
Yeah,
it's not that smart when you boil it down like that. When you have a look at it like that. So going in the peaceful route, which is what the Mortgage Liberation Protocol aims to do. And it is not a war that you're going to engage in. It is peaceful discharge. So how does it work? Very simply, the energy from the living man, woman that use the agent, which is the birth certificate construct, to sign up for the mortgage contract originally, that creates the mortgage. Yeah, the currency springs into existence through that mechanism.
Yeah.
And then the mortgage provider, the one that you've probably got the contract with, they look like they are taking payments from you because they lent you money. Well, of course, they didn't lend you any money. What they did was they used their magician's tricks to conjure the money out of thin air by taking in your signature as a deposit. It's a deposit, it's an asset for them. They match it on the other side of their balance sheet with a liability. Your deposit of energy is abandoned, and then they trade the liability, which is what you see in your mortgage account. They say you'll find the mortgage in your account. Well, that's just the liability. That's the debt side. You've got debt on this side, credit on that side. So you only see the debt side. You don't see the credit side because that's what you deposited with the bank when you signed the mortgage contract. Now, you didn't sign it, but your agent, your principal did, which is the body corporate birth certificate construct. So the principal signed the contract, and the principal is a banker. So remember, it's a banker because the person, which is the birth certificate construct, is a banker under the Bills of Exchange Act. So the banker signed a contract which created a security, a promise to pay in the future, which was deposited with the bank that you think you've got the mortgage with. They created this liability on the other side of their balance sheet, which is the mortgage debt, and then they sold it to the investment bank market, the indentured trustee, the investment bank market. Now, if you are going to correct the record, in other words, the true creditor, i.e. the living man, woman who transferred their energy as the agent through the body corporate construct, which is the birth certificate entity, the construct of the birth certificate entity, the banker, they are the bank that is using the credit, i.e. the investment bank that's now holding the deposit. Yeah, they are paying taxes to the United States Treasury for using your credit.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to go through that.
Or haven't we, in our infinite money interview? It's exactly the same principle, isn't it?
Exactly the same. Now, if you haven't seen the infinite money interview, I'll explain it. So you've got the private side and the public side of a ledger. The private side is where the living man and woman resides, right? That's the energy, the consciousness, the living, breathing man and woman who cannot step on the monopoly board, which is a public artificial game. On that game board, which we call monopoly, you've got all these artificial constructs. One of them is the birth certificate entity, what is created following the registration of the placenta. I've been through that in quite some detail on the envoy protocol.
Yeah.
Then what happens is when the agent for that body corporate construct, the birth certificate construct, comes of age, normally 18 or 21, the birth certificate construct becomes a banker. So the principal that sits on the monopoly board, which is all artificial, including the birth certificate construct is an artificial construct, that construct becomes a banker under the Bills of Exchange Act. And it can issue securities as bankers issue securities. So the security that created the mortgage was issued by the principal, which is the body corporate birth certificate construct.
Yep.
The bank is also an artificial construct. It takes that security in, and because it's got an accounting exemption, it can take that deposit, which is a deposit of energy. It's the energy of the living man, woman, transferred through their principal, the principal that they're aligned with, which is the body corporate construct. And then the bank sitting on the monopoly board, which is all artificial, takes that promise, which is a deposit, and creates debt. Asset is the deposit, debt is what on their balance sheet. Yeah. So one equals the other. One side of the balance sheet equals the other. Now what they do is they sell the debt security, the mortgage provider, or what looks like the mortgage provider, to the investment bank market, the gods of the universe, as they are often referred to, right? Or they think they're the gods of the universe, right? Now they then start trading that to make money. But in order to use the credit, this is key, really important, the investment banks are using your energy. That's the what created the mortgage. That's the deposit that went into the bank originally. Yeah. And they have to pay taxes to the United States Treasury, because the United States Treasury is operating as the bankruptcy trustee for the entire public monopoly board.
Okay.
So when you get into this a little bit further, for those who really want to understand this, and I realize it's not everybody who wants to understand this, but if you do want to understand it, I'm trying to explain it so that it makes more sense, right? On the public monopoly board, everything on that monopoly board is operating in bankruptcy. Everything. It can't be on the monopoly board, and if it is in a creditor position, it can only be in a debtor position.
Yeah.
Now, when the entire monopoly board, that's the world of commerce, went into Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 1933 under House Joint Resolution 192, every single artificial construct on the monopoly board as a public artificial entity had to basically report to the United States Treasury. Why? Because the United States Treasury is the bankruptcy trustee for the entire monopoly board, right? So if you are a debtor, you aren't the debtor because you're the living man, woman, the creditor, but the principal that you've been using on the monopoly board is a debtor. So it has to report to the United States Treasury, which is why the debtor can get an EIN number, an employee identification number, from the United States Treasury that is operating as the bankruptcy trustee, right? Now, when the investment bank, that is, by the way, also a debtor, so, you know, Jamie Dimon, who's one of the richest men in the world, allegedly, his bank is actually a debtor on the public monopoly board, right? Just put this into context, right? Everything on the artificial monopoly board is in debt. It's a debtor to the bankruptcy, whereas the United States Treasury is operating as the trustee. Now, if you know anything about bankruptcy, if you know anything about bankruptcy, you'll know that the creditors run the bankruptcy, right?
They do
through
indeed.
a bankruptcy trustee, right? And the bankruptcy trustee's job is to collect from the debtors, That's what they do. So the United States Treasury, being the bankruptcy trustee for the entire monopoly board, not just the United States, but every single country, because it's all one central system, they are collecting taxes from the debtors, right? I don't know whether this is beginning to make sense. But the investment banks, for using the energy of the creditor, is paying tax to the bankruptcy trustee, i.e. the United States Treasury. And that tax that the investment banks are paying for the use of the credit, which is the energy
that we
create, belongs to the creditors, Well, who are they? The living men and women. That don't step on the monopoly board. You see? This is how the game works. So if you want to discharge a mortgage, which is in operation, it's in play, it's, you know, you're still funding it or not, depending on what your situation is. The recoupment of the mortgage security, what you originally deposited, is possible via a corrective tax filing where a nominee, this is very important, a nominee, because it's the only way you can recoup abandoned credit is through nominees, you create a nominee which sits on the monopoly board. That is a grantor trust, an international grantor trust. It sits on the monopoly board as an artificial construct, but as a nominee for the true creditor. The man, woman. And it is then the nominee that becomes what's known as the holder in due course of the credit. Now, the investment bank is claiming that they are the holder in due course of the credit that created the mortgage. But that isn't true, because the actual creditor is the living man, woman, who sets up a new nominee to sit on the monopoly board to file a corrective return to the bankruptcy trustee, the United States Treasury, and say, hey, actually, the true holder in due course, the true creditor, is this grantor trust, not the investment bank. And all of the taxes that the investment bank has been paying to you, United States Treasury, as the bankruptcy trustee, belong to the grantor trust as the rightful nominee for the creditor.
For the creditor themselves, And I think that's the key, isn't it? Like you said, the living man can't be on the monopoly board. So you have to have a nominee to represent the living man. We spoke about this before, didn't we? And the grantor trust being that doorway between the private and the public, and how that's such a huge thing in this working for people.
You know, I told the story before, and I remember when I did the research on this, because most people do, who learn about recoupment of abandoned credit, what they do is they go, okay, so we can file 1099 OIDs and we can file them to the United States Treasury. So when you've got over the fact that it's not a countrywide monetary system, when you've got over the fact that it's a one world system, and then you figured out what original issue discount is, or barter exchange, and then you figure that out, and then you go, okay, fine. Where do we get these forms that we can file to the United States Treasury? Oh, there they are. We can download them from the IRS website. Let's fill them in and send them to the United States Treasury and say, you know, we've got this abandoned credit that we want to recoup through the 1099 OID process, and send me a check, you know.
Which you have, because you have, you know, you are the living man, the living woman, you have got that abandoned credit. But when you fill in that form in, who are you filing as? That's the big...
So the living man, woman can't step on the board. It's a cardinal sin, right? Literally, they don't warm to that at all. The living man can't operate on the board, or woman. So you can only operate through a principal or a nominee. So the principal is the person, that's the birth certificate contract, or a nominee, which is a trust, grantor trust, preferably, because the grantor can operate on the monopoly board, but the true beneficiary of the grantor trust is the living man, woman, who cannot step on the board. So they put a nominee on the board that can do their tax filing for them. Now, what most people do is they go, aha, we figured out original issue discount, so we're going to send a tax return from the debtor, the person, birth certificate construct, to the United States Treasury, and they're going to send a check back. Well, sometimes they do, because they make a mistake, because these are paper filings and they do make mistakes. But that check that comes back is under threat of being clawed back. And worse, if a debtor files for the recoupment of abandoned credit, which is not their property, that can be jail, because what's happening there is you're actually, if you do it like that, you're actually defrauding the United States Treasury, the bankruptcy trustee, and it gets a bit serious. And some people have gone to jail for doing exactly that, because they don't understand how the public and the private works, and they don't understand nominee. Now, when I started researching this in more detail in the latter part of 2024, I remember, I'll never forget this day in my entire life. I researched nominees and thought, and when I figured it out, I thought, my God, how did I not see this before? It's one of those moments where you suddenly figure out how to make water into petrol for your car. It's just as big as that, right? It was as big as that. And I remember, and I'll never forget it. It's like, I looked at it several times and thought, this is how it works.
Yeah.
This is it. This is it right here. Yeah. I've just figured it out. And now I can see exactly what's going on with nominees. And if I was to go, you know, running down the road, shrieking at the top of my voice, I've just figured out how the game of Monopoly works. No, people would look at me as if I'm a crazy guy.
Yeah.
But it is that significant.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. Like you said, the two are very distinct, very separate. You've got the public, you've got the private. Everything on the public side is debt based. Everything on the private side is credit based.
Absolutely, yeah.
The way between the two.
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry, somebody's just calling me. I've just terminated the call. So, that's basically what you're doing is when you are doing the mortgage liberation protocol. You're not doing this. We facilitate this through our
Yeah.
tax office. So what we're doing is we're setting up a grantor trust. The grantor trust becomes the nominee for you, the living man, woman. That's on the monopoly board, the grantor trust. It can send in tax returns to correct the record through the 1099 OID, which is the corrective tax return, which then diverts the taxes that the investment bank has been paying to the United States Treasury from the Treasury into the grantor trust as the true rightful holder in due course for the creditor.
Gotcha.
The creditor being the living man, woman.
Right.
So that's how you do it. And then what you do is when you've recouped the taxes, because that's what you're doing, recouping taxes from the United States Treasury, which they've received from the investment bank, which don't belong to the United States Treasury. No. Yeah. So think of a bankruptcy. The bankruptcy trustee's job is to collect debt and pay it to the creditors.
Pay it back to the creditors. Yeah.
So the living man, woman is a creditor who's going to receive the recoupment through the nominee structure, the grantor trust, from the bankruptcy trustee that is collecting debt, taxes from the investment bank that has been trading your mortgage security.
Yeah, that you created in the first place, and they're paying taxes for the privilege of using it and trading it. That's in essence what's going on here. So once the money comes back, then if you've got that credit that's come back, we'll call it money, just for for people to understand maybe a little bit more, because we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of money on this one, but we've done that before. I'm assuming then the peaceful exit to this would be to take that and pay your mortgage off.
Yeah, so what you do then is now that you've recouped the face value of the mortgage, so whatever the original debt was, whatever that is, you're going to recoup that through this mechanism we've just described. Yeah. Then you're now holding that in another grantor trust, which is the Asset Fortress Protocol.
Yes.
You're now holding in your private treasury the value of the mortgage, original value of the face value of the mortgage. Yeah. Your Asset Fortress Protocol then sends, let's just use common language, sends a discharge of the mortgage. You get a redemption statement from the mortgage provider, who are still pretending to be the mortgage provider. They're not, but they pretend to be the mortgage provider. They're actually the agent for the investment bank that is holding the security. Yeah, the gods of the universe guys in Morgan Stanley and Credit Suisse and Goldman Sachs and all those people. So your Asset Fortress Protocol, which is your second grantor trust, was your private treasury sitting on the monopoly board. Yeah, that's going to enable you now to send funds from there to the mortgage provider, who's not the mortgage provider, but for the purposes of redeeming the mortgage, they are. Yeah. So that then discharges the mortgage. The mortgage is gone. Yeah. It's not in dispute. You didn't go in a court. You didn't argue with anybody. You didn't send affidavits. You just asked the mortgage provider, how much would it be for me to discharge and pay off the mortgage? They say it's 100,000, it's 500,000, it's $1 million, whatever the balance is. You get your grantor trust with your Asset Fortress Protocol to send them those funds. The mortgage has been, in the language of the matrix, paid off. Yeah. So now you have no mortgage. We're not going to sit here and say now you are a homeowner, because that's another conversation altogether. But you now have cleared your mortgage. Okay. So there's other things that I'm thinking of here, but I won't go into that just yet. I want to cover these questions in. Let's move on to the second question then. So how does the protocol work if the bank already lent me the money? We've kind of answered this. They haven't lent you anything, have they? It's confusing, because it looks like the bank's lending you their money, but they're not. If you look in a bank's charter, which most people would never even know there is a charter, right? Every bank's got a charter of what it does and what it doesn't do, what it's supposed to do, what it's not supposed to do. One of the things it's not supposed to do is lend money.
Well, it's going to be a bit of a mind blower for people. Yeah, banks don't lend money, guys.
They're not allowed to lend money because their own money, which belongs to the shareholders of the bank. So they can't lend you shareholder money, right? Because if they do that, they're going to breach their charter. Yeah. So not many people know that banks are forbidden from lending their own money. All they can do is purchase securities from their customers. The customer is the body corporate birth certificate construct. The living man, woman is the agent for it. And what the banks do is they purchase securities. Yeah, take the security and create the double entry bookkeeping entry on the other side of the balance sheet. So the banks never lend any money because they can't. They would be breaching their charters, which would be serious if they actually lent money. And the second thing is that we've established that the true party of interest, which is terminology, legal terminology, the guy that you're going to argue with, if you went to war, if you were to go to war with the mortgage that you've got, you wouldn't be going to war with the mortgage provider because they became the agent for the holder of the mortgage security, which is the true party in interest, which is the mortgage investment bank. That's the indentured trustee, the Goldman Sachs, the Morgan Stanley lot, right? So if you were to go to war, it'd be like going to in the Second World War. That if you believe in history, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, right?
Yeah.
And then the Americans go and attack the Swiss because they thought the Swiss had attacked them at Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
That's what people are doing who are arguing with their mortgage provider.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're not arguing with the true party in interest. The true aggressor, which is the investment bank, right?
Yeah.
So how does the protocol work if the bank already lent you money? Well, you're not going to go to war with anyone. You're just going to play the game of the monopoly board, which is on the monopoly board, the banks want you to pay them installments, which is interest and principal or just interest, and then at some point pay them all the principal back.
Yeah.
So you're just playing that game.
Yeah.
You're playing the game that they understand, right?
Recoup the credit, pay the principal when the credit is sitting in your asset fortress.
Yeah. And for those people who say, oh, well, surely if you recoup the credit, because I've had this question on webinars, if you recoup the abandoned credit, won't the mortgage provider send the heavies round to your house and throw you out your house because you recoup the credit? Yeah. I've had that question. Surely it's high risk, isn't it, Ian? That, the Santander, who pretend to be the mortgage provider, get to hear that this mortgage is being recouped at the investment bank level, and Santander are going to send thugs round to turf you out your house or get their law department to issue writs and warrants to turf you out. No, because they won't even know it's going on. Because they don't hold the mortgage security anymore. They're not the party in interest, you see.
No, that was sold on years ago when you took the mortgage out in the first place, I would imagine.
Oh.
So let's go on to question number 3, which is following on from what you just said, really. What makes this different from voiding a mortgage or void mortgage arguments or these court-based remedies that other people are trying as well?
Well, if you're going to go to war, as I mentioned earlier, you're basically going to war with the biggest army, navy, and air force and space force in the world, because the mortgage market is one of the biggest markets in financial services, right? So if you're going to go to war and say the mortgage is void, you'll be like the millions who've tried that before, of which I was one, some years ago, believing that there would be a way of proving that, and that would remove the mortgage problem. You're going to be one of those guys who thinks that they can beat the biggest army, navy, and air force and space force in the world with a water pistol.
Yeah. You're not just going to war with your local TSB branch down the road. That's not how this works.
No, you're being watched if you take on the banks, and they've had it all before. It's not like they haven't had people trying to take them on all over the world. All the time, people take the banks on because they suddenly realise that the bank didn't lend them any money, and they might find the credit river case if they really look deeply into it, and they go, aha! So now I can go in the court and tell the judge that the bank never lent me any money. There's no contract. The mortgage is void, and the judge is going to go, yeah, boom, with his gavel, yeah, we'll uphold for you, and the whole mortgage market is going to shudder with a court case precedent that is going to basically undermine the entire world's mortgage market all in one go.
Yeah. Never going to happen.
Like that. No. Not really.
Okay.
No.
So this is a peaceful way. This is playing them at their own game. This is using the system as it was designed to be used, and in a peaceful, non-stressful, non-confrontational way. That's what we're trying to say here, guys. What would you rather do?
Yeah, it's advanced. You're playing Monopoly at an advanced level. That's all it is.
Yeah, yeah. Instead of throwing your toys out of the pram and kicking all of the playing pieces off the board in a tantrum, that's not going to work. So
no.
Maybe when it comes to the discharge of the mortgage, how is that actually discharged then? How does that work?
Well, if you ask, if you've got a current mortgage and you were to write to the alleged mortgage provider, or give them a call and say, hey, I've come into some money and I want to pay this mortgage off.
Yeah. Can
you send me a redemption statement? They've got to, by law, send you a redemption statement, right? So they send it to you and you say, okay, fine. I've got a trust that has got funds in it, which I'd like to use that to discharge the mortgage. Are you okay with that? And they will be okay with it. Yeah, so sure as long as you can prove that the trust is legitimate, then they'll have no problem with it at all. They don't care where they get the money from, as long as it's legitimate funds that they're going to take in. And guess what? When the bank that you think that you've got the mortgage, I mean, this is where the amount of profit these guys make is just extraordinary. So not only did they not lend you any money up front, and then they sold the mortgage security on for multiples of its face value, so they make a huge pile of cash up front. But then what they do is when you then discharge it, pay it off, then they make another pile of cash, right? Because you've now given them the discharge value of the mortgage, which they're going to take in and say, thank you very much. It's like, they thought Al Capone was into racketeering, right? But that doesn't come anywhere close to how the bankers work, right? Nowhere close.
No. So what happens then to the actual redemption payment itself? What happens with that?
Well, this is where it gets even more interesting, because you see, in the advanced game of Monopoly, when your asset fortress protocol discharges the mortgage, that discharge, which is, let's call it a transfer. So you've got 100,000 mortgage. So your asset fortress protocol sends 100,000 to discharge, pay off the mortgage. Well, that's sending that 100,000. Guess what that is? That's the issuance of a new security. That's a new deposit of energy that is going on the Monopoly board that can be recouped later.
Okay. So I hope that this is starting to twig with you all, in that not only do you get the opportunity to discharge a live mortgage by recouping the face value of that, put that into your asset fortress, and then square that away with the bank. But when you make that movement of money, we'll call it money for now, that creates, and again, this is all how it's designed, we're not making this up as we go, that creates another 100,000 security. So now you've discharged the mortgage, but now you've also created, as a creditor, another 100,000 of security that you can do what with, Ian?
Recoup it, and then pay it out from your asset fortress protocol, your private treasury. So what you're really doing now is you're getting involved in cycles of recoupment. So if you started with 100,000 mortgage and you recouped its face value into your asset fortress protocol, and then you discharge the 100,000. So now the debt is gone. Yeah, the mortgage, we've established that the mortgage is gone. It's paid off.
Yeah.
There's no war. It's just gone, right? And nobody's going to come back to you and say, hey, you know, we don't like what you did there because you played by the rules of the monopoly board, right? Then your asset fortress protocol that has issued a new security at 100,000 value to discharge the mortgage, having received the original recoupment to it. So hopefully you're getting this. It receives 100,000. It then pays out 100,000. When it pays out 100,000, it's creating a new security for 100,000. You then recoup that back to your asset fortress protocol. You can then send another 100,000 to your friend, or to go and spend it on your luxury holiday, or buy something and then recoup that. And that is the spend and recoup cycles that I talk about in my books and webinars.
You're not moving the same 100K from one place to another. It's not physically moving anywhere, is it? You're creating more credit, more security. Every movement is a new security that's created. Same when you go down the shops and you buy your shopping, or you're out down the pub buying a couple of pints of beer. It might be a small amount, but every time you tap that card and every time you hand over whatever you're handing over at the shops for your money, in terms of your credit card or your debit card, that is creating new securities every single time. Looks like we've lost Ian for a second. I'm just going to go on pause and we'll come back to you guys. And we're back. So grateful to have you back with us. Let's kick off where we left off, which was we were talking about the redemption payment itself and what happens with that. We've pretty much covered that, haven't we, Ian, to be fair? A really great question is the next one, which is why is an international grantor trust involved? Earlier on, you spoke about that eureka moment that you had in using a grantor trust and the fiduciary role, having that doorway into the public from the private. So do you just want to just expand on that a little bit in terms of why we're using an international grantor trust, from a risk perspective and just from the mechanics of how it works, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's technical, but everything on the public monopoly board, all the energy gets on the public monopoly board through nominees. So that's basically it. If you want to move from private to public, public to private, you've got to move through a nominee. And a nominee is just a fiduciary. It's just a fancy word for fiduciary, trustee. That's all it really is. It's just a fancy word. I think the bankers like to use it and the IRS use it because a lot of people probably think, oh, I don't know what that is. But it's just a fiduciary or a trustee. And it's artificial. So it sits on the monopoly board as a piece on the monopoly board. Remember, the player is not on the board. The player is the living man, woman who's moving the piece, which is normally, because they don't realize, they're normally moving the birth certificate construct around the monopoly board. That's the player piece. But what you're doing here is you're putting two new pieces on the board. You're putting a grantor trust that is going to operate as the holder in due course of the credit, with the beneficiary being the living man, woman, and that entity is going to file tax returns to redirect the taxes back to the grantor trust, the tax filing grantor trust. And then when the recoupment of that energy, which is tax recoupment, comes in, that's going to arrive in the asset fortress grantor trust, which is your private treasury. And that is what you're going to use on the monopoly board, the public monopoly board, the asset fortress protocol. It's your treasury. It replaces, it doesn't remove, but it just is in parallel to the birth certificate construct as a player piece on the board. You're just using another piece. You're just putting another piece on the board, which you control, and that's going to receive your recoupments, which is energy, tax rebate from the Treasury, the bankruptcy trustee, that is going to pay the taxes that are due for the creditor, but can only pay to the creditor being the living man, woman, through a nominee.
Yeah. Can you just, for the benefit of anybody watching this, because I get it, it took me a while, but I understand the separation, certainly. But we were talking earlier about risk and the way that some people, the problem and the way some people have been filing. Could you just explain the differential between the birth certificate construct that we are agent for and the fact that we don't own that? And I think that's a big part to this. You know, you've mentioned that these two new pieces that go on the board, you own them, you control them, and that's significant in itself. But the fact that they're international trusts as well that can sit on that monopoly board, what would be the fundamental differences between somebody who is thinking they're doing this in the right way by filing the 1099s, but doing that through the birth certificate or the birth certificate construct, rather than having the grantor trust filing on behalf of the beneficiary, just from a risk perspective? So people really get that.
It's a great question, and it kind of reveals the trap. So when the birth certificate construct is created, that's the registration event. You got to look at who are the players that are involved in that deception, right? So you've got the mum and the dad who are they're victims of a deception. They don't get it. Nobody explains it, right?
Yeah.
Mum and dad,
my kids, before I learned all of this.
Yeah, the mum and dad, they're coerced into signing up for this registration of this birth certificate construct. They think that they're doing the right thing. Why would they not? It's like nobody's going to give them a risk warning. Or if you do this, what you're actually doing is joining the living baby to this artificial construct in a contractual joinder, which is going to play out with all the various mortgages, loans, credit cards, taxes, voting, and everything else that the principal, i.e. the birth certificate construct, is going to get involved in on the public monopoly board. They don't know that. They think they're doing the right thing, and there's no information to look at, really, unless you're listening to one of these interviews. You're not going to know, right? Or you're listening to somebody else's interview, because there are other people that have talked about this. I don't think they've quite figured out all the pieces of the public board. Most have only figured out part of the board, because there's a lot going on that monopoly board. So what you then find is that you've basically got the decedent estate of the birth certificate construct, right? So that is in the system now. It sits on the Monopoly Board of Commerce, the public monopoly board, as a decedent estate, right? Now, who really controls that decedent estate? Well, the Crown does, or the cabal does, depending on where you are. Let's just call them the cabal. Let's just call them the controllers, because it's been registered with the name of that, the name on the birth certificate, the last name normally in the box, the capital letters name.
Yeah.
That is theirs, yeah?
Yeah.
That's their name. We think it's our family name, and I was fooled by it for most of my life. Okay, fine. That's, stamp in capital letters. That's my dad's name. I'm going to use that name, yeah? Because we've had stamps going back through the generations, right? So I'm proud to use that name, right? So that's another part of the deception, yeah? But that name stamp on the birth certificate that my mum and dad gave me for safekeeping, look after this, you're going to need this at some point. All genuinely, they were doing that. Of course they were, genuinely to help me. That name belongs to the Crown, because it's like if you register a company, Warner Brothers, as I mentioned on the one of the other interviews. Yeah. If you go around calling yourself Warner Brothers, they're not going to like it too much, are they? So their legal department's going to try and sue you, as they tried with me, with using Matrix Freedom. Matrix, the movie The Matrix. They actually wrote to me telling me to take the Matrix Freedom name off the internet. Back in the day when we were our PMA was matrix freedom. So basically, in a nutshell, so I don't go on too long, the birth certificate construct, the name on it doesn't belong to the creditor.
No.
It belongs to the cabal. And it's a debtor because it is by nature, if it's on the public board, it is a debtor entity, right? Now, the grantor trust is also on the public monopoly board, but it's different because it's been created. Whoever creates owns, right? That's a maxim in law, right? If you create something, you own it, yeah? If you genuinely create it, not copy somebody else's design, if you genuinely create it. Well, when you create a grantor trust, the living man, woman is the beneficiary of that trust. And the beneficiary has the highest rights in equity. That's why beneficiaries win in court cases on trust, because beneficiaries have got rights. The grantor and the trustee are hired help to look after the trust, right? But the difference between the person, which is the birth certificate construct, is that the rights belong to the cabal, whereas in a grantor trust, the rights belong to the beneficiary. So that's the short answer. I've given you a bit of a longer answer.
Yeah, no, I get that. And this is why people have been getting in trouble, isn't it? They're not filing from the correct standing. That's kind of the way I would put that.
The secret to this game is nominee, and then the next secret to the game is that you've got to represent. You've got to actually be what's known as the holder in due course.
Yeah,
it's not just a string of fancy words. It actually means something. You are. When I say you, the principal, which is the birth certificate construct, is the debtor that issues the security, but it is by definition a debtor, and it's not controlled by the living man. It's controlled by the cabal. So if you try and recoup abandoned credit, which is tax rebates, the taxes that the investment banks are paying to the Treasury as usage, rental of the energy, back to the bankruptcy creditor, bankruptcy trustee for the creditor, you can't recoup for the creditor if the creditor entity or the entity that is recouping, belongs to the crown. It's not yours. You can't have it.
No.
You can't recoup something that belongs to the cabal because the cabal control and own the birth certificate construct. Whereas a grantor trust is controlled by the beneficiary off the board, on the private side of the ledger.
And that's why we use it. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense and a bit more clarity for everybody. Just to kind of wrap this up, Ian, because I know we've covered mortgage liberation, and I want to just touch on the redemption side of this, because we have the mortgage liberation protocol, we have the mortgage redemption protocol as well. A lot of the redemption questions have already been answered just organically through what we've been talking about. But if we were to sum up the real world benefits of this, what would somebody see as far as real life benefits once that mortgage has been liberated? Aside from the obvious, I'm not paying my mortgage payments every month anymore, and that I can actually recoup the payment that I then made. We spoke about that 100,000 being moved, and that's a new security. You're not taking the same 100 grand and just moving that round in isolation, and it's just a single amount. You're creating new securities. So aside from the mortgage being discharged, don't have to pay my monthly mortgage payments anymore, and then I've got the added bonus now where I can actually recoup the redemption fee that I put in there. What else would you consider to be some real world benefits surrounding this?
Well, you see a lot of people say the mortgage is a death pledge. Mortgage, mortgage, it's French. They say, it's a death pledge. Well, that's because they don't understand the advanced rules of monopoly, right? The game is about recouping the credit that you put on the board. Well, mortgage is one of the biggest ways of putting credit on the board,
for most people.
Probably the biggest debt that anyone ever takes on, arguably, is the mortgage, right? Unless you're in business and you've got huge business loans. But not for the average guy on the street, the mortgage is the biggest debt that they probably ever take on. Now, they look at it as, oh my God, I've got a mortgage, I'm going to have to pay it back. oh my God, what happens if I lose my job? What happens if, you know, something happens, my health fails and I can't pay it, and the bank's going to come and take my house away, and it's all doom and gloom and anxiety, and oh my God, you know, it's maybe the bank's going to foreclose, and you know, and all these things, right?
Yeah.
That's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
That isn't the truthful way to look at it. Because the truthful way to look at it is that the bank operating as a nominee gave the true creditor, the living man woman, an opportunity to put some credit on the monopoly board that can then be recouped. So you see, when you look at it truthfully, when you understand it like I do, the mortgage is a blessing, not a curse.
Yeah.
Even a mortgage foreclosure is a blessing, not a curse. Because those people that are facing mortgage foreclosure, they might realize that they are the creditor. They might realize, because of the mortgage foreclosure, that they actually can recoup the abandoned credit and then go and purchase an interest in a property. And I say an interest in a property, they're not going to purchase the property probably, because they can't, and that's another interview on its own. But, and it might sound weird, and a lot of people are going to go, what is he talking about? How can mortgage foreclosure be a benefit rather than a curse? Because it might be the tipping point. It may well be that the mortgage foreclosure and the stress of being in arrears and not paying the mortgage on the monopoly board might be the catalyst.
Yeah.
Waking up to the reality that there is a monopoly board and there is a public and a private, and the bank that organised the mortgages was a nominee for the true creditor, and that you might realise, you might come across this information.
Yeah.
So you see, and I've said this many times, and people look at me sideways. I said, well, actually, there is a silver lining to mortgage foreclosure. And that is that it might be the catalyst that wakes you up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can speak to that. You know, that's what happened to me and my family. We lost a property. It was a beautiful property as well. But the silver lining to that is a little bit further down the line, that was the catalyst. You know, that was the catalyst to me waking up and learning about this and knowing that, okay, don't live in that house anymore, but hey, I can recoup the mortgage back.
Yeah. I mean, it's the universe moves in a mysterious way. Consciousness, the dark and the light side. Often it brings you problems, and mortgages is a problem. Yeah, you just get rid of the mortgage is a problem. Mortgage foreclosure is a problem. Oh my God, it's like the end of the world for a lot of people that are facing losing their property. Well, it's not theirs in the first place.
No.
And what they've got is an opportunity to wake up to how this game is really played. So I say that it's not a problem. I've said this before and people misunderstood me, right? I've said, you know, there's these stories going around the internet. Oh yeah, Ian's cost people their homes, right? You know, there's that story, yeah? You're going to find it. You know, some of the others that are in competition with what we do at Republic of Old Souls have said, yeah, if you go to Ian and that group over there, you go there with a house and you leave there and you've lost your house, yeah? Because that's the bullshit story that these people are saying. Well, and I've said in response to that, well, maybe it's a blessing, because you might have woken up to how the game works, and that got completely misunderstood and taken all out of context. And Ian says losing your house is a good thing. Well, I didn't say that. I said the foreclosure event, the journey that you go on, might be a hard lesson that actually leads you to the promised land.
Yeah, to better things, and that awakening and knowing what you actually are entitled to as the creditor. That's exactly what's led us. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say it was a wonderful experience to lose my house in, what was it, 2008, 2009, when everything all crashed and I went into negative equity on the property, and it was a mess, you know, and it was a very stressful time. I'm not going to lie, but look at where we are now. Okay, we might not own, or we might live in rented accommodation now, but I don't really care. You know, we're in a nice house, family's warm, dry, well fed, everybody's safe. But on top of that, we've learned a lot over the years. We've learned from those mistakes, but we've also taken the positives from those, knowing now that we're in a much more commanding position to be able to recoup all of that abandoned credit back that belongs to us and set the family up in a much better way, financially speaking, for the future. Now knowing how the financial system and how the monopoly board works and how, you know, money works, as people call it. Now that we understand that, I feel it's been an empowering thing for us, not a negative. I really do. So if we just
teaching, you know, people only learn, in my experience, including me, you know, when you've got real big problems to solve, that's when you're learning, isn't it? That's when you have to learn how to get out of the problem. You have to look for some remedies. So the problem is actually a good thing. Often you actually should be inviting problems in, because although they don't feel very good when they first arrive, actually when you look back on them, it's like, oh yeah, do you remember that problem? And we solved it with the, you know, with all these remedies that took us to a better place. So that's mortgage. The mortgage is it's actually a blessing, not a curse, in my opinion. So
no, I totally get that, and I hope you guys are starting to see that shift, you know, changing and starting to take place, because you really want to be seeing the positives of this. It's not that death grip that people talk about. It is actually a blessing, in that you've got the ability to recoup it because you created it in the first place. You created the credit. So what I'm hearing here, Ian.
Yeah, so some people actually who know how the game works, they max out their mortgages.
Yeah, I can imagine they would do.
Because they know that that's a way to get credit on the board, which they can recoup. So some of the savviest people out there who actually know how the game works, they're putting as much credit on the monopoly board as they possibly can, because they know they can recoup it all. And it's the only way you can. You can't recoup energy from the monopoly board that you haven't put on there.
No, it has to be there in the first place. So don't view these things as a bind. View them as a doorway and a vehicle to recoupment. And I think the big takeaway here as well for many people, I'm hoping the big takeaway here for many people is this does not have to be stressful. It does not have to be confrontational. You don't have to go to war. In fact, going to war is probably the worst thing you could do. This is a peaceful exit from the mortgage, a peaceful exit from the debt that you feel that you're in, when in reality you're a creditor.
In my experience, and I've got more than the average in war, right? You only go to war when there's no other option. It's the last resort, right? If there's no other option, you go to war.
Well, hopefully you if you're watching this, you'll realize there is another option.
There is. So this is the option. You don't have to go to war with this.
Exactly.
Whereas a lot of people go to war and then lose and then realize that that wasn't very smart. Whereas you don't have to go to war with this. That's one of the biggest benefits of this. This is non-confrontational. It's very peaceful.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of benefits, what I'm hearing here, certainly you can do this peacefully. Yeah, so you can end your mortgage peacefully. There's no confrontation required with this whatsoever. That would be the first benefit. Recoup the credit, you know, so it's not just a case of discharging the mortgage through the mortgage liberation protocol. If you've got a live mortgage, we also have the mortgage redemption protocol, which allows you to recoup past mortgages that you've had, not live ones. So just let that sink in for a minute. You think about the mortgages you've had over the past 20, 25 years. How many of those have you had? How many remortgages have you had? How many times have you been living in the same property and decided to put a new kitchen in, or new windows, or new bathroom, or just supposedly release some equity from the property by remortgaging that property? That is a new security that you've created. So you've got the ability to do that as well. Obviously, discharging the mortgage that you've got using that recoup credit so that you can pay that down, and then recouping that movement of that cash as well. So recoup the redemption payment itself. This is now starting to get into this cycling of the credit, isn't it? The infinite money, as we talk about. And then I guess the last one really is the protection. You know, the risk factor that you spoke about, the differential between people who are trying to do this, but they're doing it without the right standing. They're doing it through the birth certificate construct. You don't own it. The cabal owns that. You're never gonna win doing it that way. If anything, you're probably putting yourself at more risk. But using an international grantor trust and the nominee status, as you call it there, Ian, that is the way to protect you as the living man, as the beneficiary.
What you're doing is you're doing the same as the banks, right? If you haven't already figured it out, the banks are operating as nominees for the true creditor. So what you're doing is you're putting a nominee on the monopoly board that is doing what the banks do.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In fact, that's quite a bit of a mic drop, that one. If you think about it, guys, you're doing no different to what the banks are doing. They are the nominees. You're creating a structure that has a nominee. No different. Like we said, we're not reinventing things here. We're not changing the rules. We're using the rule book as it was designed to be used. That's why it's non-confrontational. Yeah.
If you want to play the game of Monopoly, you need to know the rules. Yeah, it's as simple as that.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, Ian, could you just very quickly, because I know that I feel there's been some confusion with people between mortgage liberation and mortgage redemption. I know the differences. You know the differences clearly. Maybe just for the audience watching, could you just explain the difference between the mortgage liberation protocol and then the mortgage redemption protocol?
Yeah, the liberation is because you're in a mortgage, you're funding it. So you're being liberated from something which is weighing you down, the payments on the mortgage. Whereas redemption is recouping the past mortgages that you've had, that you've discharged, paid off in the language of the matrix. So they're different. The actual way of recouping the credit is the same, but the problem is different. The problem of the mortgage, the current mortgage, is you want to get out of it, liberate it. You want to liberate from it, get free of it. And the problem of the past mortgage is that the credit it belongs to you, the true creditor, is sitting on the monopoly board, just left there. And I've used this analogy before. Just imagine if you turned up and somebody said, right, this is your inheritance here, and there's a suitcase packed full, $20 million in notes sitting in this suitcase, and this is your inheritance, right? And you said, okay, fine, thank you for that, and then you just left it on the table and walked away.
Yeah.
Never to come back again.
That's what you do.
Who would do that?
Yeah.
Who would open that suitcase up, see all those notes in there, and go, oh, thanks for that, and then just walk away and leave it there?
Yeah.
No one. No one that I know. I think you'd take it with you, wouldn't you, the old suitcase? So.
Pretty much think so. Maybe with a handcuff or two.
Maybe with a handcuff on it, so that you don't drop it somewhere and lose it,
So let me put this into a real world situation, just so that people can understand it, okay? And I'm going to use me as an example. Let's say, I know we live in rented, but let's say this house that we were living in right now, it was mortgaged. Through mortgage liberation, I could recoup the face value of what I borrowed for the house that I'm living in. I can then discharge that mortgage so I don't have to pay my monthly mortgage payments anymore, and I'm now mortgage free. I've not got that expense going out every month, which for a lot of people, with interest rates going up and everything else and cost of living going up, it's really hard for people, isn't it? Some people are literally making the decision, do I put food on the table, or do I pay the mortgage, or do I pay the rent, or whatever it is? That's the reality of where a lot of people find themselves now. It's horrific. So that would be a huge, probably, like you said, probably one of the biggest monthly bills a family would ever have leaving their bank account would be the mortgage payment or the rent payment. But in this situation, I could recoup the mortgage, get rid of that, not having to pay that every month. But then I'm also thinking, well, before I lived in this house, I lived in that house, and I had a mortgage there. And before I lived in that house, I lived in another property. People tend to climb the property ladder, don't they? They start off in a 2 up, 2 down or whatever. And then they have a family, they have kids, and they need a bigger place, so on and so forth. And that's exactly what I did. We went from a little 2 up, 2 down into a 3-bed, into a 4-bed, and so on and so forth. So if I've just used mortgage liberation to pay the mortgage off in this house, and now I don't have my monthly payments, I could then use mortgage redemption to recoup the payment I've just made and get that back on this property. So now not only do I not have a mortgage, but I've also now got the credit face value back in my asset fortress. So I've got credit in there. But then I could also use mortgage redemption for the past 3 properties that I had going back over the last 20, 25 years. I know there's a limit to how far you can go back, but let's say it was 25 years and I had 3 other properties. And those 3 properties were, first one was 100,000, second one was 200,000, the third one was 300,000. That's another 600,000 that I could use mortgage redemption to recoup that, add that into the pot, into the asset fortress pot. Now I'm sitting in the same house. I have no mortgage payments, and I've possibly got 700,000-800,000 in my asset fortress that I can use, that I can push back out onto the monopoly board. I can use it for cost of living. I can use it for holidays. I can use it for whatever I want because it's my private treasury. I'm the beneficiary. I can do what I want with that. But because I'm pushing it back out on the monopoly board, I can then use the infinite money protocol to recycle that year on year on year. Why would anybody not want to do that?
If somebody brought you a monopoly board and said, right, you can play this game, and every time you go around the board, you get a new tranche of currency. And by the way, you can actually spend this currency out there. You can take it out there, and you can go and use it out there in the big wide world. I think you'd like that monopoly board, wouldn't you? You'd like that game. I think everyone would want that. You'd want one of those in your Christmas stocking, wouldn't you? One of those games that you can actually take the monopoly board currency and take it out and spend it, and every time you play the game you get more. Well, that's what you can do here. You can spend and recoup through the mechanisms that we can facilitate, and that's why I call it the game of Monopoly, because it is actually and when you actually look at the origins of the game, why did the cabal launch the game of Monopoly in the first place?
No, I was just going to say that.
Well, they were showing us what's going on. Like it came out. It was a little bit before the Wizard of Oz, and if you look at the Wizard of Oz, what's going on there? The yellow brick road, the wizard behind the curtain. That is the public and the private. The straw man, the tin man, the tin, the TIN. That's the tax identification number. The straw man is the person. The Wizard of Oz is the secret hand that runs the game. They were telling us what's going on, and in the same way as they brought Monopoly out. And everyone thought at the time, oh, that's an interesting game. I better get one of those. But they're actually telling you that's what you're already doing, but you don't realize it.
Yeah. Have a think about that, guys. Next time you go and get your Monopoly board out and have a look at it. Because we talk about recycling credit. Yeah. What happens every time you pass go? You get an extra 200, don't you? Every time you pass go, you're recycling. As you go around the board, you're recycling that credit. You get more. It's all there in front of us in full view,
right in front of our eyes, but we don't see it because nobody explains it, and that's why we don't know about it. And you're not going to learn about it from your teacher. Your mum, your dad probably don't know about it unless they've been on our interviews and our webinars. And they're going to carry on playing the game without even realizing they are playing a game of Monopoly.
Okay. No, I love that. Let's just cover a couple of the possible objections, Ian, because I know people maybe people are new to this. Maybe this is the first interview you've ever seen with Ian and myself. And certainly some of the concerns or questions, I think one of the big ones would be this one, Ian. This sounds really technical. I don't know anything about trusts. I don't know what OID 1099 OID filings are. I don't know any of that.
Well, you don't need to. If you went into hospital and you needed surgery on your brain, would you go and study all the books on brain surgery? No, you wouldn't. You'd just go and trust that hopefully the surgeon knows what he or she's doing. Yeah. Well, we've been studying this, and I've been studying this for a long time. We know what we're doing. We've had results. I think I figured out how the game works, which is why the cabal tries to jail me quite regularly. So that's what happens when you're over the target. They don't like anyone being over the target, so they try and jail you, or they undermine your reputation, which is the first thing they do. So if you're looking out there at all this negative propaganda about me, that's a good sign, actually. It's like, well, maybe he's talking some sense. Maybe this propaganda is there for a reason, to try and turn people away. So all I'll say to you is that I knew a long time ago, when I built a very substantial financial services organization, that the average guy and girl don't want to study everything, and definitely don't want to do it all for themselves. They want to hand it over to someone who can facilitate it for them. And that's what we do. So we take away the complexity. We don't say, here's a pack, go and read all this and go and have a go with it. No, we actually facilitate it. You're in control every step of the way, but we hold your hand all the way through as your facilitator.
Now, obviously, if you do want to learn about this stuff, that's why we're doing these videos. We would love for people to have a better understanding of this, because knowledge is very powerful.
Absolutely.
Not just in terms of understanding the process you're going through, but it's also, we've spoken about mortgage liberation. I think the knowledge when it comes to this is also very liberating for people, just from a mindset perspective, just from a standing perspective, to know that you are a creditor, not a debtor, that you've never been a debtor, that you are the creditor, you are the source of everything that is going out onto that monopoly board. That's a real positive mind shift in itself. And in a world that's full of negativity, full of drama and doom and gloom, would it not be a better place to be, to come from a place of positivity and from a place of real standing? And that comes with knowledge. So I would certainly implore you, as I'm sure Ian would, we're not going to dump a huge pack in front of you and say, go read all of this. And if you don't, we're not working with you. But it would be great if you could learn just a little bit about how this works.
I knew when I got involved in this several years ago that there was a lot of merit, but I didn't understand it all because it's complicated, right? And nobody gives you the uni course that you just turn up and listen to lectures and write a few papers here and there and spend the rest of the time probably in the pub. But that's a story for a different day. Nobody gives you that course. You've got to learn this. And but I knew that there was a lot to this, and that's why I kept going at it, because I could see the potential of it, but I could also see that many people hadn't quite figured it out. Because if they had, loads of people would be going, oh yeah, I followed that method and I got all these results. Well, you don't see that very often. There are some examples of that, but they're not widespread. So I knew that there was a big problem to solve, and I enjoy solving problems. So that's what one of the things that I like doing. So,
okay. Well, any final thoughts, Ian, before we kind of wrap this up? I mean, clearly, when it comes to what you've been talking about, I'm going to show my age here now, but, there is no hitchhiker's guide to the monopoly board, is there? There really isn't.
Really? I mean, I have to say that the information that I try and put across gives people a massive head start if they really want to learn how to play Monopoly. And I've got a flagship webinar that I did actually only recently, last weekend. And that, although it went on for nearly 3 hours, in my opinion, and of course I would say this, that's 3 hours of time that you could exchange for knowledge that has taken me, I don't know, 30,000 hours of research. So you can have 3 hours looking into what I know, because I explain it all and break it all down, compared to the 30,000 hours that I've put in over the years. Which one would you like?
Exactly.
And the hard knocks and the pushbacks and the lessons about how not to do it. All of that, all of that I've done. So you can come in now and have a look at this without all those hard knocks, lessons, and 30,000 hours of study. You can come in now and you can scoop it all up, and we can facilitate it for you. And I think that's a pretty good deal, personally. So
I think so. And at the end of the day, you've got to decide how important is this to me. A lot of this is also about people's priorities, isn't it? To some extent, people say they haven't got time. Have a look at how much time you spend watching Netflix or whatever it may be, and maybe just apportion some of that time to something like this that in the long run would definitely be more worthwhile for you.
If you think about it, and I have done, right, and this will be my final thoughts, right? How many hours have you spent working? How many hours have you spent slaving away at your business, playing Monopoly that you didn't realize you were playing, as basically a modern slave? Because that's what it is. We've all done it, right? Including me. For most of my life, I've been a modern slave. And it's only been in the last few years that I've realized that the game of modern slavery and how it really works. So you can exchange modern slavery, which is what mortgages are, if you don't know the rules of Monopoly, with liberation and with the pathway of the light. Because you see, the light actually wants you to know this stuff. Because the Monopoly board, I haven't said this on any other interview, but the Monopoly board is very dark. And the man, woman is not on the board. They're in the light. Anything on the board is dark. It has to be by the nature of it. So it depends where you want to be. Do you want to play Monopoly in the dark with the dark side, or do you want to play Monopoly in the light?
Great final words, Ian. I've enjoyed it today. I think it's been an eye-opener, and I hope it's been an eye-opener for you guys as well. We're going to continue doing these interviews. I think this is now the final one that we've covered when it comes to the protocols. So if you haven't seen any of the others, please go back to the ROS Media channel. We've got each individual protocol all mapped out there for you, from infinite money to begin with, right the way through to what we've done here today. But we are also breaking down other subject matters to do with this space, because as we've already mentioned, there are a lot of people that are seeking freedom. There are a lot of people that are trying different things, trying different methodologies. And unfortunately, a lot of those are not working. Even worse than that, some of those methodologies are getting them into a worse position than they were when they started. So we're going to be breaking some of those methodologies down as well, so that you can understand what they are, why they don't work, and what's the solution to that as well. So keep an eye on the channel, keep checking in, keep looking for the new recently added videos, because we're constantly adding new content to the platform, and we will see you on the next episode. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.
Bye for now.